Calaroga Shark Media.
By 1540, the Catholic Church was in full panic mode. Half of Europe had gone Protestant, the Pope's authority was in tatters, and it looked like the whole Roman system might collapse entirely. Entire kingdoms were abandoning the faith their ancestors had died for. Luther's ideas were spreading like plague across the continent. Calvin's Geneva was proving that Protestant communities could thrive without papal authority. But Rome didn't become the center of Christianity for 1500 years by giving up easily. The Catholic Church was about to launch the most systematic and effective counter-revolution in religious history. They would deploy new weapons, reformed theology, militant new religious orders, and an Inquisition that would make the medieval version look gentle by comparison. The Catholic Counter-Reformation was not merely defensive reaction to Protestant success. It was a coordinated campaign to recapture lost territories, strengthen papal authority, and create a new form of militant Catholicism that could compete with Protestant fervor and organization. This is White Smoke, Episode 34, The Counterattack. The church that emerged from this struggle would be more disciplined, more centralized, and more powerful than anything medieval Christianity had produced. Rome was about to prove that reports of Catholicism's death had been greatly exaggerated. The papacy that Luther thought he had mortally wounded was preparing to strike back with unprecedented force and sophistication. Today, we examine the Catholic Counter-Reformation, the brilliant and brutal campaign that saved papal Christianity from Protestant conquest and transformed the Catholic Church into a global empire that would endure for centuries. The Council of Trent represented the Catholic Church's most important theological gathering since the early ecumenical councils. Beginning in 1545 and continuing intermittently for 18 years, Trent brought together the finest Catholic theologians in Europe to address the fundamental questions that Protestant reformers had raised about Christian doctrine and practice. The bishops at Trent faced an impossible task. They needed to reform obvious abuses that had scandalized European Christianity, while simultaneously defending traditional Catholic teachings that Protestants had rejected. They had to acknowledge the legitimacy of Protestant criticisms without conceding the validity of Protestant solutions. Trent's response was masterful in its theological sophistication and political calculation. The council reaffirmed every major Catholic doctrine that Protestants had challenged, but clarified and strengthened these teachings in ways that eliminated many of the ambiguities and abuses that had made Protestant criticism possible. On the crucial question of salvation, Trent affirmed that both faith and good works were necessary, rejecting Luther's doctrine of salvation by faith alone, while acknowledging the primacy of divine grace. On scripture and tradition, the council declared both to be equally authoritative sources of divine revelation, maintaining papal interpretive authority while promising more careful biblical scholarship. The seven sacraments were reaffirmed as genuine channels of divine grace, not merely symbolic acts as Protestants claimed. The Mass was declared to be a true sacrifice, not just a memorial meal. Clerical celibacy was maintained as a requirement for priestly ordination. The Pope's supreme authority over the universal church was proclaimed without qualification or compromise. Yet Trent also addressed the practical abuses that had made Protestant criticism effective. The sale of indulgences was strictly regulated, though not abolished entirely. Bishops were required to reside in their dioceses and provide pastoral care rather than treating their offices as sinecures. Seminary education was mandated to ensure that priests received proper theological training. The council's disciplinary reforms created a new model of Catholic leadership that emphasized competence, dedication, and moral integrity. The poorly educated, corrupt, and absent clergy who had scandalized medieval Christianity were to be replaced by a professional priesthood capable of defending Catholic doctrine through both learning and exemplary conduct. Trent's success lay not merely in its theological formulations, but in its creation of institutional mechanisms for implementing reform. The Roman Catechism provided standardized religious instruction for the entire Catholic world. The Roman Breviary reformed clerical prayer. The Roman Missal standardized liturgical practice across all Catholic territories. More importantly, Trent established the principle that papal authority was absolute and final in all matters of faith and morals. The conciliar movement that had challenged papal supremacy in the 15th century was definitively rejected. The Pope alone possessed authority to interpret Trent's decrees and implement its reforms throughout the Catholic world. The Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius Loyola in 1540, provided the shock troops for Catholic Counter-Reformation. These Jesuits took a special vow of absolute obedience to the Pope that went beyond the traditional monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They became the papal special forces, willing to go anywhere and do anything to advance Catholic interests. Ignatius himself was a former Spanish soldier who had experienced a religious conversion while recovering from battlefield wounds. His military background shaped the Jesuit constitution, which emphasized discipline, flexibility, and strategic thinking in ways that traditional monastic orders had never attempted. Jesuit education became the secret weapon of Catholic Counter-Reformation. Their schools provided rigorous classical education combined with unwavering Catholic orthodoxy, creating a generation of Catholic intellectuals who could compete with Protestant scholars on equal terms. Jesuit universities in Rome, Paris, and across Catholic Europe became centers of learning that attracted students from Protestant territories. The Jesuits also became the Catholic Church's most effective missionaries, carrying the faith to Asia, Africa, and the Americas with unprecedented success. Francis Xavier's missions to India and Japan demonstrated that Catholic Christianity could expand globally, even while losing ground in Europe. The Jesuit missions in China and the Americas created new Catholic populations that compensated for Protestant gains in Europe. Yet the Jesuits also served as papal intelligence agents and political operatives in Protestant territories. Their superior education and linguistic skills made them ideal diplomats and confessors to Catholic rulers. They provided the papacy with information about Protestant movements and political developments that enabled more effective Counter-Reformation strategies. The Roman Inquisition, re-established in 1542, became the Catholic Church's most feared weapon against Protestant infiltration. Under the direction of Cardinal Giovanni Carafa, later Pope Paul IV, the Holy Office created a systematic apparatus for identifying, trying, and executing heretics throughout Catholic territories. The Inquisition of the Counter-Reformation operated with far greater efficiency and brutality than its medieval predecessor. Professional inquisitors received extensive legal training and operated according to standardized procedures that made conviction almost inevitable for anyone brought before their tribunals. The climate of fear they created effectively eliminated Protestant movements in Spain and Italy. The Index of Prohibited Books, established in 1559, represented the Catholic Church's attempt to control the flow of dangerous ideas through systematic censorship. Any book that challenged Catholic teaching, promoted Protestant theology, or contained questionable moral content was banned throughout Catholic territories. Printing presses were monitored, booksellers were licensed, and possession of forbidden books could result in imprisonment or death. The index's effectiveness varied across Catholic territories, but it succeeded in creating intellectual isolation that protected Catholic populations from Protestant influences. The price of this protection was the stifling of intellectual creativity and scientific advancement in Catholic countries, as scholars learned to avoid topics that might attract inquisitorial attention. Catholic art became a powerful weapon in the Counter-Reformation campaign. The Council of Trent encouraged artistic expression that would inspire religious devotion and counter Protestant criticism of Catholic practices. The result was the explosion of Baroque art and architecture that transformed Catholic churches into overwhelming sensory experiences designed to move hearts as well as minds. Bernini's sculptures, Caravaggio's paintings, and the architectural marvels of Counter-Reformation Rome created a visual theology that proclaimed Catholic truth through beauty rather than argument. While Protestant churches were stripped bare and austere, Catholic churches exploded with golden altars, dramatic sculptures, and ceiling frescoes that transported worshippers into mystical experiences of divine presence. The emotional power of Counter-Reformation art provided ordinary Catholics with aesthetic and spiritual experiences that Protestant worship could not match. The cold rationality of Protestant theology paled in comparison to the overwhelming beauty of Catholic artistic expression. Rome became a pilgrimage destination where the faithful could experience the full glory of Catholic civilization. Catholic mysticism flourished during the Counter-Reformation, as saints like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross provided spiritual alternatives to Protestant emphasis on biblical study. Their mystical writings offered Catholics direct access to divine experience that bypassed the intellectual debates that dominated Protestant theology. The canonization of Counter-Reformation saints created new models of Catholic sanctity that combined traditional asceticism with active engagement in reforming church and society. These saints demonstrated that Catholic Christianity could produce spiritual heroes who surpassed Protestant reformers in both personal holiness and practical effectiveness. By 1600, the Catholic Counter-Reformation had achieved remarkable success in stemming Protestant advance and reclaiming lost territories. Poland, Bavaria, and the Austrian territories had been reclaimed for Catholicism through a combination of Jesuit education, inquisitorial pressure, and political support from Catholic rulers. The missionary success of Catholic Christianity in Asia and the Americas more than compensated for Protestant gains in Northern Europe. While Protestants remained largely confined to European territories, Catholic missions created global Christian communities that made the Catholic Church truly universal in ways that medieval Christianity had never achieved. Yet the Counter-Reformation also transformed Catholicism in ways that its architects had not anticipated. The church that emerged from Trent was more centralized, more authoritarian, and more suspicious of intellectual freedom than medieval Catholicism had ever been. Papal authority became more absolute, but at the cost of the theological diversity and intellectual creativity that had characterized earlier Catholic tradition. The price of Catholic survival was the creation of a defensive mentality that would persist for centuries. The church that had confidently engaged with classical philosophy and embraced rational inquiry during the medieval period became suspicious of any ideas that might lead to Protestant conclusions. The success of the Counter-Reformation in preserving Catholic Christianity came at the cost of permanently dividing European civilization along religious lines. The religious wars that followed would devastate the continent for decades, as Catholic and Protestant armies slaughtered each other in conflicts that combined theological hatred with political ambition. Yet the Catholic Counter-Reformation also demonstrated the remarkable adaptability and resilience of papal Christianity. The institution that Protestant reformers had pronounced dead proved capable of profound internal reform while maintaining essential continuity with its historical tradition. The Counter-Reformation saved the Catholic Church, but it also transformed it into something new, a global religious empire centered on absolute papal authority and sustained by militant religious orders, systematic censorship, and overwhelming artistic beauty. The medieval dream of Christendom was dead, but Catholic Christianity had found new ways to expand and survive in an increasingly pluralistic world. The papacy that emerged from the Counter-Reformation was stronger in some ways than its medieval predecessor, but it ruled over a divided church in a fragmented world where religious unity would never again be possible. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration, but still written and produced by real podcasters, Mark Francis and John McDermott.